Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Heretics Quarter, the podcast where we speak to apostates and discuss the issues they've dealt with and are dealing with. My name is Obaid Omer, and joining me, as usual, is Dean.
Hi.
Nulli, unfortunately, won't be with us. She's not feeling well, and hopefully she'll get better soon. Today, we have on special guest with us. Her name is Arya Parsipur. She grew up in Iran underneath the Ayatollah regime, and she's recently had a book out called Limu Sirin, which is basically her life in Iran underneath the Iranian regime. Hi, Arya. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a really good opportunity.
So I thought we'd start, if you could just tell us a little bit of your background, a little bit of your story, so people get an idea of that, and then we could just go from there.
Sure. So I was born in Iran in the early 80s, which is called the 60s in Iran, because we have a different calendar. So we are called the 60s kids, which is like the era that life was really hard. And we're also called the burnt generation, again, because we were the first generation that was born right after the revolution happens and the Mullahs take over, and it's a very strict sort of theocratic regime. And but I was born in a family that weren't particularly that religious, so I was safe that way. But in school and in society and that, it was complete opposite. It was very strict. Islamic ideology was imposed on the kids. They were really brainwashed about everything, really, how to live, how to dress, how to basically just go about every day. And that was sort of like created a really harsh school life for us. It was very strict. So that also add to that the war. So the war happens between Iran and Iraq during the 80s, and that lasted for 8 years. So imagine our childhood was also collided with a war that lasted that long. So that wasn't fun either. So because then there was shortages of everything, basically groceries, oil, power, toys, stationery, school material, everything. So you also have to deal with that. So that basically created a sort of like difficult childhood. So that's why, like, so the book is called Limu Sirin, The Bitter Story of Life After the Iranian Revolution. So Limu Sirin means lemon, sweet lemon, which is a type of a lemon that grows in Iran, and it has a bittersweet taste. And so I use that as an analogy to name my book, because it portrays a life, tells the memories of a childhood that was filled with these bitter moments that I mentioned, but also portrays a childhood that came with kind of sweetness that children can always create in their life. So it's basically that, and intertwined with that, the stories that I've told, I talk about history of Iran, the politics, and later on also a little bit about how we grew up as teenagers when in an isolated country where everyone else was introduced to internet and everything else. We were still in an isolated country, and the ways we found to also understand what's going on around the world and so on. Yeah.
Just something I wanted to ask, like, because you're talking about, like, as your kids, you were being indoctrinated, and then you said you come from a family that wasn't that religious, and I've spoken to a couple other people who mentioned that, and then there were a lot of non-religious people, especially in the like a city like Tehran, where religion didn't play that much of an important role. So, like, as you were growing up, and as you were kids, were you told by your teachers or anything like that? So, if your parents don't pray or if your mom doesn't wear the hijab, like, were you kind of encouraged to, inform on your parents, that kind of thing, or like was that ever done to you guys? Or
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So they were sort of training us to spy on our families and come and tell on them at school. So then this way they would discover who still believes in who believes in Islam and the values of this revolution and the values of this regime. And so this was one of the ways to find out, was to ask the kids. And kids, they're honest, they're telling the truth, and so on. They don't understand. So we were asked in school, do you drink this particular thing at home, or are you keeping pictures of the late Shah at home? Right. So because this is a revolution that overthrew the Shah, if there were still people who believed in him or was on his side, they needed to know. So they would ask kids if parents are keeping these pictures, or if there are any books, holy books of other religions at home, to know whether we are actual Muslims or we're hiding it or we have other religion, or things like that. So, or whether our parents are saying their daily prayers or fasting and so on. And you always had to, you had to be smart about it, not telling on your parents, but then also at home. I remember my mom. So my grandpa had this bottle of wine. Sometimes he would drink, and he was keeping it wrapped in stuff like in cotton and everything, like hiding it, so we don't openly see it and go and tell on them at school. And my mom always would tell us, like, don't speak of any of this back in school. Like if my dad was making comments about Khomeini at that time, they would always make sure to tell us, like, remember, don't tell you of this in school. So yes, it was like that. So it never happened to me. So like it happened to me, they did ask us, but we never really said anything. But I was reading on social media. I was reading the other day that someone was saying that she did tell that yes, my dad, he's keeping a picture of the Shah and he never says his prayers. And so next thing, they come to the door and sort of arrest the dad and everything. So yes, this was happening, and they had other ways of also finding out what your beliefs were. They were just they would frequently investigate houses. They're just coming to a house and start searching, looking for music, because music was considered un-Islamic back in the beginning of the revolution, or Western films, or other things they would consider something that they're not happy with because it's not in accordance with their values, their religious values, or their revolution's values. So they would arrest the people, and some people would end up being executed for that. So yes, it was like that. It was very, very harsh.
So how much of it was, say, religious, and how much of it was political? Just because I'm not too familiar with the Iranian politics personally.
Oh, well, funny thing is that religion and politics were completely intertwined after the revolution. That's what they wanted. So Islamic Sharia law was completely implemented in the country, in the society. It was the law. So politics and religion, they were going hand in hand. They weren't. So these activities, they were both political and religious. Because before that, religion didn't really matter. And whoever that had whatever religion, they would get jobs based on their merits, instead of their religious beliefs. But when the revolution happens, they call themselves revolution's values, which is like Islamic views and that. So they wanted to make sure that whoever that had shared the same values with them would come and get the positions in the regime, in the government. So you would have to take a test so they can gauge your understanding and your knowledge on Islam before they give you a job. So if a manager of some governmental institute or so, you have to pass a test, religious test first. So in a way, that's why they wanted the whole system to be completely run by Islamic law.
I'm just curious because, like, okay, obviously now you're seeing a lot of the. I mean, it started with My Stealthy Freedom, and then a lot of the protests you're seeing now started at the end of last year. With I forget the name of the woman who held up the scarf on the. She was standing on like the little power station blocks. Yeah, and then protests really sparked up after that. It's a lot of young people, but I was wondering, like I know, like in the '90s, there'd been some protests against the regime as well that were fairly, squashed fairly quickly. Like, is this because of the secular families that were able to stop the indoctrination of their kids, and then it was these kids that grew up, and there's more now? Or is it just now, do you think it's more of the young people just getting access to the internet, and even however sensitive it is, at least seeing something of the outside world and going, we don't want this? Like, do you think it's a combination of both, or one or the other, or do you have no clue?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. You see, majority of Iranians have always had secular views, right? So, and it was only like about 40 years ago. So it's not like, so the people who remember the Shah's time, they're still alive. They still have positions in the regime. They still have jobs. They are parents, so they still remember that. So they carry still those values with them and taught us as children those values. So majority of us, I would say, grew up with that kind of freedom in religion, freedom of speech, and secular views. So that, I would say, was there. And also, but then as kids, you can't do much, right? So you have these different lives in school, and then you have at home, and the ones who were lucky like me, they could have that balance of Islamic ideology in school and more open-minded views at home. But we grow up and we get to the point that we realize, well, we already had a difficult childhood, but we don't want to take this anymore. Now we're grown-ups. Now we want to change our own destiny. We want to, we don't want these old mullahs, Ayatollahs, rule over us, and we want to make that change. So that also combines with the emergence of internet and then connecting to the rest of the world and seeing what else is happening in any other country in the world, and realizing, well, Iran is the only country that hijab is compulsory. Why should we have it? And so on. So yes, a combination of all. And so I would say that throughout these 40 years, there have always been conflict in the country between the people and the regime. The gap has always been there. It's just that the recent is gone. It's like it's bigger and it's more epidemic. So more people even realize that there is no way this regime can be reformed, and the only solution is to completely have a complete secular democratic regime. And those kids that were supposed to be brainwashed to carry the same values that this regime wanted went the other direction. They were machinated to actually believe in those certain things, but it went the other way around. And now they've grown up and they realize we don't want this. You've already ruined our childhood. Now at least let us have a bright future. And so they're on the street protesting, and so there's majority of them are young people. So they're on the street protesting and disobeying the compulsory law on hijab and so on. And also, I would say, and there's another revolution on its way. It takes stages, right? So about 10 years ago, it was a really big one on the street, and it was hampered down. But you can see that these are the sparks. And now, over the last 8 months, the spark has started again, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So, and now a lot of experts on issues in Iran, political situation in Iran, believe that this regime is going downhill, and there's no way for them to come back. So now these people we have to push a bit more to completely like win over them. And but yeah, I would say this. It's just, and also is that you're fed up with what happens, and your eyes open, and you just wanna change that. You don't want to take that from them anymore.
It makes sense.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Dean.
No, I was just saying. It makes sense that with their modern world being so, communication being so rapid today. Like you can't the Ayatollahs and any of these people trying to push religious power onto the youth. It's just not going to be as easy as it was for them in the past. There's just too much access to knowledge, too much access to each other, to communication and the truth. Although I guess we're seeing that it's certainly possible for the issues to continue to exist, but it makes sense that things are getting better over time. At least it appears that way.
I'm just curious, are you able to contact friends or family in Iran, or is that like really difficult for you to speak to them? Like, are you speaking to people there to find out more what's going on?
Well, it's said that you shouldn't really talk on the phone about politics because there's always a chance that your conversation might be tracked down. So how I get updated about Iran's current situation, it's always on social media, mostly Twitter, because there's a lot of debates going on, and there's a lot of information and a lot of discussion going on about what's happening, and people's protests on the streets and recent activities and so on. So this is how I get my information. But if I was going to talk to my family, we would avoid talking about politics and talking about sensitive issues or saying some specific names and so on. So no, I wouldn't. I don't discuss politics with my family, and in fact, they are also. Because they live in Iran and they wouldn't want. I wouldn't want any issue, obviously, for them. So we just keep it clear of politics.
Out of curiosity, in terms of modern politics in Iran, what are sort of the main political parties and how much like right wing or left wing do they lean?
Right. So again, because politics in Iran it's religious based, regardless of the party that is there and with the party that people vote for, there's always this leader who's always there. It's not, no one elects him. And he's also like the biggest religious figure in the country, or supposed to be, but he interferes with politics a lot. And obviously he's a dictator, and so you could say there are two parties. One is a fundamentalist and one is a reformist. But again, it's usually formalities. They're not functioning really in those terms, because obviously before anyone anyone candidates for presidency, they have to go through this filtration that a group of Ayatollahs have, like a congress of these Ayatollahs that go through all these candidates, and they obviously only give permission to the ones that the supreme leader would approve of. So you see, everything is sort of connected to him. So by this, basically, he runs the country. And so I would say saying we have two parties in Iran is just a way to pull the ropes and play people, so they can rule the country longer. It's not really, the reformists are not really doing anything against the will of the supreme leader. Fundamentalists, they are maybe superficially fundamentals, but then reformists are also fundamentals because it comes from the same root. And the same root is the supreme leader and the regime and the religious values and all. So it's nothing gets reformed really. It's just a name. So then people would go and elect, and 4 more years, another president comes, and the president won't do anything without permission of the leader. So basically, this is just a way of fooling people, and also, so then they can, just be in power longer. And then the election also, I would say, is a joke, because there could be cheating if the supreme leader is not happy with the outcome, and there are many issues there, and so I wouldn't really say. So talking about their tendency to left and right, well, obviously they are far right. It's nothing really. They're not different parties in the country that are active, or there are any opposition that are against each other, or so on. It's not like that. They all coming from the same roots, and the elections are not really effective.
Okay, so it's basically all the same thing, and it's not. But what about the people? What are the people, like the youth, and what kind of movements do they have to counter this?
Right. So every time, so obviously people would want some reform in the situation of the country. So I would say, sadly, every time they get fooled and they go vote for the candidate that's coming from the reformist party, and they get their hopes high that things will change and things would be a bit easier. They would be more open-minded, like cultural activities, filmmakers thinking, well, filmmakers can go vote for the reformists, thinking, well, it would be easier for us to make films with different contexts. Then artists thinking, well, it would be a bit easier for them as well, so they can expand their activities a bit more. The people, normal people, also thinking, well, on the streets it would be a bit freer. There wouldn't be religious police or whatever coming and hassling us on what we're wearing. So there would be that. Everyone thinking we want a little bit of easy, this life to be a bit easier, and they think Reformist Party brings that for them, but they don't, and it's just the same thing. So this recently, May last year, there was another election. Again, there was, so the reforms and the fundamentals were competing against each other, and there was this movement of let's not vote, because as long as you vote, you're giving credibility to this regime, because you're actually saying that some change might happen if I go and vote. So, but if you don't, you're showing your way of disapproval of this regime by saying my vote won't matter at all, because it's always the same thing. So there was that movement of let's not vote and sort of ban or condemn this election. But then another movement started and counterattacked that and said, no, let's do vote, because if you don't vote for the reformists, then the candidate of the fundamentals will come up, and he is a horrible man. He's in charge of murdering of many people and so on. So it's in a way choose between bad and worse, and let's have the bad one, because then we don't want the worst to happen. And so they did elected Rouhani, which was their candidate for, it was the second round of presidency of the Reformist Party. But then a few months passed and Rouhani made everything worse, nothing got easier. And I think it was to this point that people realized, okay, we have given this party so many chances so far, like so far 4 or 5 times they have elected for this party, or I'll go more into the detail into that. But then they realized, well, we can't trust this. We're not trusting the Reformist Party anymore because nothing gets changed, and we kept getting lied to. So now it's got to this point that they are saying, fine, then this regime is not. We can't help it. It's what it is. It's not going to get reformed, and that means we want a regime change. So now people wanting the complete change in the regime, and the Ayatollahs completely going out of politics, complete secularism, and in fact, interestingly, wanting the prince coming back to Iran. The prince he's the strongest opposition to this regime, and he is the son of the late Shah that this revolution overthrew. So,
okay, so there must be like a very loose connection. I mean, wow, it's surprising.
I'm just curious, and again, like I only know, just like you, I only know from social media. I don't obviously have contacts with anyone in Iran, but like with MEK, and they're leading some of the protests that are going on against the regime, but they themselves are, from what I can tell, they're fundamentalists. They're not any different than the Ayatollahs. Is it just that they want power for themselves and take it away from the Ayatollahs? And so, what's the situation with that going on right now? Like with the protests that are going on.
Your voice was cut off. Are you talking about MEK?
Yeah.
Are you talking about MEK?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So they are fundamentalists too, and they are more interested in power rather than the well-being of Iranian people and Iran as a country, because they've been active for a few decades, and they've always had this dodgy past of shifting their ideology and their tendency to different ideologies, and so they're not really trustworthy. With regards to Khomeini, which was the one who founded this regime, they were the first ones who called him Imam and came in to see him and congratulated him on his victory. And so the leader of this MEK group at that time became the candidate for presidency. But Khomeini, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Khomeini is the main Ayatollah who founded this regime. He disapproved of him. He said, no, you're not. I don't want you as a candidate. You're not allowed, or whatever his reason was. And so ever since then, this MEK group, they've changed their they've changed the whole ideology about what's going on, and now they have Islamic Republic regime is their enemy, whereas just before that they congratulated him, and so it shows that he was after power, and once they realized he's not getting it, so now they became the opposition to this regime, and they moved to Iraq and started their political activities there, and they've been in charge of many terrorist attacks. And they took, in the Iran-Iraq war, they took Saddam's side and fought against Iran to overthrow this regime. And now currently they have a base in Paris, and they're getting funded from somewhere unknown, no one knows. And so they're always holding these conferences and symposiums and all that, and gathering people, but it's still very dodgy. No one knows where they get funded, and so then the leader of this group, who became candidate for presidency back then, he all of a sudden disappeared. They're not clear about what happened to him. Some people are saying he's dead. Some people are saying he's hiding. So you see, the past is not really trustworthy, and they also have Islamic views. So now the leader is a woman, and she wears full hijab. She doesn't shake hands with other politicians, male politicians, which is a very typical thing that happens inside the country also. And they're holding religious ceremonies and so on. So people thinking, well, if we want that, then we already have the Islamic regime ruling us. Why would we overthrow them and then wanting you to come and take over? It doesn't make sense. So see, inside Iran, they don't have any supporters, and so they're not really important. The most important opposition, as I mentioned before, is the prince, who doesn't have any dark sides in his past, and he's very well spoken, got a lot of charisma, very well educated, and he's been politically active for many years against this regime, and he's got a lot of he has many supporters inside and outside of Iran. And so he is also the biggest fear of the regime, because they know he has much support. So now they're trying to tarnish his reputation now inside the country. So every now and then you see some rumor comes out about him, and that's he's getting money from the Saudis, and he's doing this and he's doing that. So therefore it shows that he is the main one. Therefore, they are really aiming for him to tarnish his reputation, because they know he has support. But at MEC, no one really takes them that seriously.
Okay.
So I would say,
yeah, I wouldn't have thought. Just from like my overview of Iranian politics, I had no idea about any of that. Really, it's fascinating.
Just one thing, like a couple of people, like a few friends and stuff I've spoken to, and one thing they talked about was, so like, I mean, I know a bit of the history and stuff. So like, when basically the CIA and the British intelligence services, when they overthrew Mossad, and that's when the Shah came in, and so a lot of people use that, and they're like, well, remember when that happened? So they're looking for conspiracies everywhere. I wonder if that's something that's going on right now, or do you know, like, I know, like, I've seen in the media where they're saying, oh, these are just puppets of the United States or puppets of Saudi, they're getting funded by foreign governments. But is the regime or anyone else, or even just people in the street, talking about this being some sort of conspiracy like the Mossad thing, or is that not even a consideration with most of the people there, or that you know of?
Sorry, what do you think it's like?
Okay, like I said, speaking with friends, they talked about how, because of how Mossad was overthrown and the Shah came in, and there was like a huge conspiracy about that, and that was actually something that happened, right? It wasn't just, fake news or whatever, right? But it was a legitimate conspiracy that happened, and because of that, people were always looking for conspiracies. I mean, again, this is something I've heard from speaking with friends. So, like, in the protests that are going on right now, like, I know the regime is putting out things like, okay, these are Saudi funded, or they're funded by the U.S. or funded by the West. But is the population in general, or certain segments of the population, also claiming that this is just another conspiracy, like what had happened with Mossad, because they're looking for conspiracies, or is that like not really an issue during these protests?
Oh no. So you see, the people who were involved in politics back then, like our parents' generation, we always say we are very different from them. We're more exposed to the rest of the world, to the ideas, to the political knowledge, and so on. And we are more careful about these conspiracy theories and this herd mentality of, oh, you say something and we all want to follow you without thinking. We are really aware of that, and I would say no, it's not like they were looking for conspiracy. And if they were going to think, oh, America is our enemy and they are always conspiring, and whoever that's related to America, then we don't trust. It's not like that at all either, which is unlike what people thought before the revolution. The calling Shah puppet of the United States, and the United States is the enemy, and all that. The people that are protesting now, my generation, they are not like that at all. In fact, in the protests, they clearly come out and say, our enemies are right here. They lie to us that it's America. So when you shout that on the street, you're clearly telling them that we're not buying that. We know that America is not our enemy, like you said before. And if there was an enemy, it's actually you, the Ayatollahs, the regime, Khamenei, the supreme leader, and the president, all the other Ayatollahs who are in this circle that's ruling us. We know that you guys are our real enemy. So I think now the picture is clearer for them, much better than it was before, because the people who fought for this revolution, I think they were very, very confused with what's right, what's wrong, and what's going on. And as I said, they did really follow a bit of a hen mentality. And if you ask them now, the majority of them saying we regret this revolution. We should have let the Shah stay, and maybe what needed reform. They say what needed reform was the Shah's regime, not a revolution. Revolution wasn't needed. A reform in the form of the regime was needed, not a revolution. And so they regret that, because now they realize, I mean, history makes judgment, right? Now they realize that the Shah they actually did care about them and the country. Whereas these Ayatollahs, they absolutely, they're absolutely no wish to improve Iran as a country or develop the life of the people or raise the standard of living of Iranians or nothing like that. All they are after is, in the beginning, it was Islamic values. Now it's power and wealth, because obviously the money that they're making from all the oil that they're selling, it tastes really good for them. So they want to carry on ruling the country and taking advantage of that, with zero willingness to spend that inside the country, helping the people, making their lives a little bit easier. So people got to the point to realize that the biggest enemies are Ayatollahs. Just recently, they went to this mosque in a small town. I mean, you would think that small towns, people are more religious, or they're not really exposed to more ideas and they don't know. But actually, farmers of this small town, they go to the local mosque, but they turn their backs to the imam, Friday imam, and they shout, our enemy is right behind us. Our country is in front of us. In a way, translation of it would roughly like that. Basically saying that we know that you guys are our enemies. Or on the street, America is not our enemy, you guys are our enemy. And so you see, I think they have the clearer picture now compared to what happened before during Mossad's time. And that Mossad has coup and stuff. That one is a very tricky thing that happened. There are different ideas about that. Some saying it was definitely a coup because CIA came out and showed documents that they did overthrow him. But then there are other documents that are coming out and saying no. 2 days before that, the Shah actually fired him, asked him to resign, but he ignored that and carried on. So then a coup happened and overthrew him. So I wouldn't say this was just a side story. I wouldn't say Mossad's story is 100% clear on what happened.
Okay.
I was just going to say, back to your book. You mentioned that it was a lot of it had this theme of this bittersweetness. How much of that? I guess from an outsider's perspective, I do see a lot of that in the Iranian culture, in terms of maybe not the politics, because a lot of that really is quite problematic. But in terms of the culture itself, because when you compare Iran and Saudi Arabia, in terms of the people and the culture, a lot of the time it seems like Iran is more rich in terms of in terms of its culture, in terms of its ability to create its own place in the modern world, unlike countries like Saudi Arabia, or even to a large extent, I don't know, a lot of the Muslim countries. Do you think that's a true statement, or sorry, it's just my perspective as an outsider, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, I think you're right, because what I always say is that Islam really never matched 100% with Iranian culture, and it was
Yeah.
some kind of it was when it was some kind of garment that you wear, but it doesn't look nice on you, sort of a thing, because it doesn't match to it doesn't match to
Yeah.
your values, to your way of thinking. It doesn't look nice on you. That's how a feeling I have with Islam for Iranians, because if you look back to history, when first Islam came to Iran, it was through
Yeah.
force. It was through an invasion, and um, and many people accepted it fearing their life, because it was either I kill you or you join, and then pay us taxes by the Arabs tax from the south. And
Yeah.
before that, we already had this many years of religion, of Zoroastrianism. So we had already been introduced to the concept of God. We already had a religion that everyone followed, and we already had all that civilization. So we didn't need another one coming and explaining to us all these concepts. And so this new religion comes that and and so Iran was this land, this really green land, fertile land of civilization, and this religion from this harsh climate of Saudi comes in and trying to exposing their and imposing their values on us. It just didn't really felt good. It just didn't really feel good or right.
Yeah.
And there were many resentments at first, but then obviously many wars and battles happened, and the Iranians were weakened, and eventually they took over. And so then, but then over time, I wouldn't say Iranians were religious. It was never. And then again, so Shiism is something that it's only Iranians, right? And if you look at the Islamic world, it's only in Iran that there is Shiism, which is again in a way of saying, well, we don't want to follow that line, and we want to have our own thing. And up to 500 years ago, again, the kings and the sultans that ruled Iran, they weren't religious. It was nothing. It wasn't really a religious country, and it was only about this dynasty, Safavid dynasty, that things got a bit more religious, because they needed to unite the country against the Ottoman Empire, which was a Sunni Muslim entity. So they needed to stay strong. So then Shiism expanded in Iran to sort of unite against them in a way. So that's why religion comes to picture, to sort of bring everyone under an umbrella
Yeah.
and stuff.
It
And
makes
so,
sense because yeah,
yeah,
culturally, Iran has especially like because Iran has such a rich history and culture, and Islam comes as this imperial force that tries to impose itself onto. Yeah, that's how I've seen it as well. But yeah,
so,
continue. Sorry.
yeah, yes, sure. So but then again, after that, it's not a religious country at all. And I would say throughout this course of history that we've had, this regime is the only one that religion has been imposed so strictly on people. And that is only because this regime's fundamentals is based on religion. They stay in power if people are religious. So religious tendencies are promoted, because the more religious people are, then the longer they can stay in power. So, but that's not even lasting long. So during the Shah's time, coming back to more contemporary era, during the Shah's time 40 years ago, Iran was a really secular, modern Islamic country. I mean, we were still Muslims, but everything was just all the normal other activities were happening. It was nothing. You couldn't even tell it's an Islamic country, because Islamic law wasn't implemented in the country. So. And then this regime comes, and the only way they can stay in power is by promoting it, and they go really harsh. So you can see the change was drastic from that open-minded sort of society to this really strict one. And even this is not lasting long. So now people have sort of stealthy activities, underground activities. There's always drinking alcohol. There's always parties that boys and girls have, there's always these tendencies of, or Iranian women, majority of Iranian women, as soon as they leave the country, they take their headscarves off because it's not what they believe in. They're forced to have that on. And so, again, they want to go back to that. They want to go back to that phase where everyone wears whatever they want, whatever they wish, and they don't want anything imposed on them. And this, because this regime is really strictly pushing this, atheism has been expanding in Iran now. So people are like, fine, we are completely done with religion, no religion whatsoever. And now this new generation are going all full atheists. So I can say we're one of the biggest, like, underground atheists in the world now. Just as a counterattack to what this regime is trying to force feed us.
Yeah. And how much of that is, I don't know, political, or in a sense, how much of that is, do you think will in the future have some kind of political effect on the country?
You mean atheism?
Yeah.
So I would say the start of atheism in Iran is a political movement. As I said, to sort of counterattack what this regime has been trying to push at us. And so more of a political move rather than sort of like a standalone movement to for atheist civil rights or something like that. It's more political. It's to, so you see, because they see it as a way of fighting the Ayatollahs by saying, well, the more you're religious, the more they can take advantage of you. They can take you on a ride. But if you completely break this chain and say you're free from any religion, then there is no way they can control you. So they see it as a way of fighting back by saying there is no God, there's none, all of that is not real, and you've been fooled by the Ayatollahs. And so if you become an atheist, then obviously you stop going to mosque and you stop listening to Ayatollahs, and they have no power, right? Because if they go on a Friday, they go to a mosque and they see no one there. It's a big blow, a big hit for this regime to seeing people really moving away from religion. And so that's why I would say that atheism has started and it's expanding among the young people mostly, because older generation, they still have these connections and these sort of limitations for themselves, whereas the young generation, they have more tendency towards atheism.
I think around the world,
just a question on that. Like when you're saying there's more atheists coming in. Like I've been seeing stuff where people are saying, okay, you know what? Get rid of Islam. We were originally, Zoroastrians, and that's the Iranian religion. Let's go back to that. So, like, this is kind of a little depressing question. Like, do you think there's any possibility of it going from a Shia-Sunni divide, Persian-Arab divide, to a struggle between Zoroastrians and Muslims? Like I said, I've seen a lot of stuff on social media where people are saying, we used to be Zoroastrians, let's give up Islam and go back to being Zoroastrians. So do you think there's any chance of something like that happening? I know, like, it's a complete guess, but...
Yeah. No, you're right. So when I was in college in Tehran, I was introduced to this underground group gatherings that people were discussing their willingness to leave Islam behind and convert to Zoroastrianism, again, because it was an ancient Persian religion, and Iranians are more proud of their Persian identity, or even, I can even say, identify themselves as Persians than Muslims. And so they wanted to go to Zoroastrianism in a way to sort of connect to that lost Persian identity that this regime has tried to demolish. Or Christianity, because to them, Christianity sort of had that connection to the Western world, and they would always thinking of the Western world being this free world, and all the countries that have developed, they're all majority of Christians. So then again, they would make that connection to that. thinking, well, I think Iran would be more developed if we were Christians. So that kind of a mindset. But it was also, there were also talks about atheism, which was just this complete separation from any religion. And that was the first time I was actually introduced to atheism. Like, I had never heard of it before. And some people were even discussing that. So yes, there are tendencies of people going to Zoroastrianism and also Christianity, but I would still say the majority to atheism, because by the end of the day, Zoroastrianism and Christianity are also religions. And when they like in a big picture, they talk about religion being this kind of chain that hold you in place, then they don't want that at all. So then they won't want to even to go near any religion, regardless of how ancient it is or whatever connection it has for them. So I would also, Zoroastrianism it's not really known for us now. It's minority groups in Iran that they have that, and they also have their own limitations. Being a religion, always have limitations and always have these ceremonies and religious activities, and so some people wouldn't want that at all. They want a complete detachment from all. So there's more tendency towards atheism for them. So I would still say atheism, because then that would be a new identity for Persians, and that would also create a separation from the Arabs and the Sunnis, wouldn't it? Because then it's complete, like no relation to any religion whatsoever. So I would still say atheism.
Okay. Another question, like, now, I mean, I've heard and I've read, like, the rise of Wahhabism from Saudi Arabia was a direct response to the Ayatollahs taking over in Iran. And so, whilst the Shah was there, even though there was Shia Sunni, the Saudis weren't really using petrodollars to spread Wahhabism. But once the Ayatollahs took over, you could start seeing more funding from Saudi going out to spread Wahhabism to counter the effects of the Iranian regime. Did you hear the reverse in Iran? Like, okay, we're doing this to stop Saudi spreading their influence? Like, did you hear that kind of justification in Iran? Or was it just, we're doing this because this is what we do? Like, did they ever use, like, the Saudi thing? Like, look at what Saudi's doing. They're spreading, Sunniism around the world. We want to counter them. We have to spread Shiaism. Like, was there that kind of justification from the regime as you were growing up, or do you remember that? Or
when the regime started, they had a lot of work to do inside the country. They had to sort of wipe out whatever trace of the Shah's time that was there, and then the war happened. So I think in the beginning they were really they were still shaky. The foundations were still really shaky. So they had to make sure that they solidified their own regime inside the country first, and then fight the war second. And then after that was done, past 1989, they started thinking of spreading the revolution, or Shiism, as you said, to other countries nearby. So yes, they did have this idea of spreading Shiism and, or as they call it, exporting the revolutionary values, and which was in a way interfering in the weaker Arabic countries around. And one of the things also that Khomeini did to, and he wanted to spread Shiism, right? And he wanted to expand the population of Shias. And so he suggested that Iranians had 4 or 5 kids each family. That was like one of his ways of looking at it, spreading Shiism. And also there was many of them Iranians were being killed in the war, so the population was going down. So to him, it was like, well, make more kids and make up for it. And also they wanted to expand the population of Shiism, so they worked on that and tried to interfere to other countries and sort of expand the revolution and sort of advertise Shiism and stuff. To that point, I know that that was their plan. But whether it was to contrast the Saudis and the Wahhabism and that, I'm not sure on that. But there was this idea of spreading the revolution to other countries, and I think they did some work as well in Africa as well. So they went as far as that. But then I can say these years now that they've had completely extracted the oil and sold it, and so they're very wealthy now. Then they have that they can afford sort of building different establishments in weak African countries, and then expressing or exposing them to Shiism, and then maybe converting them to Shiism and things like that. So yeah, they have that, but I don't know more than that about this.
Okay. Okay, so sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second. Just getting back to like when you were growing up. I know you touched about this a little bit, but like, what was the general climate like when you like growing up underneath there? Was it you were always fearful, or you're always paranoid that someone's listening? Like you couldn't have been a happy way to grow up. Like you can't really enjoy yourself, right? Like you're always wondering, like, is someone looking over your shoulder? Or as kids, were you kind of sheltered from that?
Yes, it was like that. As soon as you stepped out of your house, it was like that. Because then on the streets, at school, any other place you go, it was always like that. So there was this Islamic ethnic police that was on the street that was checking you. At school, they were your student, they were your teachers, and the head teacher and all the others that worked in the office. They had that, and if you were going to any other class or any other social gathering, there was always something, some big brother looking at you in a way. Some law was there to keep you in this box that you were supposed to behave within. So it was always that, but not many were lucky like me, I guess. Oh, I guess majority were like that, but there were also some families who were religious inside as well. So the kids wouldn't have any chance of getting a different opinion about things, because then outside and inside it was all the same. Their parents were as strict Muslims, practicing Muslims as much as it was outside. So I would say yes. The school was really difficult with that from that aspect. Also, was the head teachers usually mostly were hired if they were full chador hijab, if they were wearing full hijab, and if they had really strict values and Islamic mindset and that, and they would always make sure keep the kids checked if they always had their headscarf on. And so obviously the boys and girls schools were separated, so the girls were always checked on if they're keeping the headscarf always on, or if they're covering up. And no male teacher was allowed to come in our school. No female teacher was allowed to go to the boys' school and things like that. So, with regards of making sure that we are always behaving according to Islamic values. Yes, there was always sort of like a pair of eyes looking over your shoulder. Yeah, I would say it was always that fear was always there. So I was just reading someone sharing their memories the other day on social media, and she was saying that so at school the head teacher was very strict, and so they had to wear chador, full hijab, at school. But then she goes home, and then she goes out on the street with her mom, and they run into this head teacher, and obviously she still has to cover, but she wasn't wearing that cover chador thing. And so the next day at school, the teacher pulls her out of the classroom and gives her like a full talk about how two-faced she is and how horrible it is and how much God hates people with two-faced people, and that if she's wearing chador in the school, they should also be wearing chador on the street and so on. And she's only like 9, 10. So you see, you're going out in the street and you're running into your teacher who's already checking you at school, but then also running to you in the street and coming and tell you that kind of a thing was always there. So we all experienced it in a way.
Okay. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Thank you for your time. I'm just curious, like.
No, that's absolutely.
Are you worried at all of like an overcorrection? So, I appreciate the fact that people want to be secular and atheist, and I know I would rather see a secular society where, I think religion is ridiculous, but like I said, I would rather see a secular society where people say, okay, you're allowed, you can't force your religion on me, but if you want to practice, you can practice it. But are you worried about like an overcorrection in Iran where they are so fed up and so angry with the Ayatollahs and with Islam that once or if this revolution succeeds and they kick the religious people out, will then the general population stop people from going to mosques? Will they shut down mosques? Will they close any museum, like it's Muslim museums or Muslim like any Muslim architecture or anything like that? Like, are you afraid of it going too far the other way, where it is a atheist regime, but they're being hardcore and fundamentalist and crushing any kind of religion? Like, are you afraid of something like that?
I know, I understand. I think it's human nature, isn't it? It's like a pendulum. It's going this direction and going to that direction, always going to the far left or far right, or to the both ends of the spectrum, and then eventually they manage to come and stand in the middle and keep the balance. So I think because it's gone really to the extreme in this era, once it collapses, it might happen. I would actually think it would happen that people would want to close the mosques and push out the mullahs out of it, or beat the Ayatollahs, or harm them in any way, and that to sort of to retaliate for all these years that the mullahs have been doing that to them in a way. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. Yes, not that atheists in Iran, I don't think they would impose their atheism on anyone, but when it comes to mullahs, because they have this, because now everything, everywhere you look, you see a mullah, and you think all the problems in this country is all because of them. So once this regime collapses, there would be a fear. I think mullahs would be fearful of what people can do to them. And even now, you can still see traces of hatred that people have in mullahs. So now in the slogans, in the process, they're shouting, "Mullahs get lost out of the country," or you can see still on the street people chasing mullahs and trying to beat them. Still now, there's like videos on social media you see people sharing in Iran, and everyone's saying, "Oh, good on you! Beat the hell out of that guy. They deserve nothing," and so on. Or even someone was telling me that when this mullah, they were in this office, and as soon as a mullah comes, everyone starts glaring at him and not allowing him to come into the line, or trying to push him to the side, and like behaviors like that shows resentment towards mullahs. And it could be anyone that wears the special clothing they have, the turban and the sort of abaya on the shoulders and that. So whoever is wearing that, immediately people have this resentment towards them. And so imagine now the regime collapses and they're not in power anymore. So I think it's going to be like a bit of a fundamental or radical behavior from the people towards them. But then it will even it out. It will eventually balance, and people of any religion can just live freely in the country. But the problem is, though, with the mindset that Muslims have, the fanatics, is that they see themselves above other religion. So they see that they should have better rights or like priorities over other religions on how many mosques there should be and how much religious activity should be done. So that is a problem. So I think people would fight that first, and maybe there would be suggestions of some mosques being closed down and turned into libraries or cultural centers, and religious activities only limited to the religious sites, regardless of what religion it is. So I think that way I can say that the balance is there, and that people of any religion can do their activities without interfering in others' beliefs.
Oh, at least that sounds.
Sorry, is Dean gone? Is he?
He just sent me a message. He apologized. Something happened and he got completely disconnected. He can't reconnect. So he just apologized. He can't get back on. But I just have one last question for you, and then if after that, if you want to talk about anything else, feel free. What do you think of Imam Tawhidi? Like, I have a lot of doubts about this guy, and I'm not 100% convinced on him. What are your feelings about him?
Yeah, okay, so he's an interesting character, right? So he is Imam. He's an Imam.
Yeah.
So he would certainly have some views and values that all the other Imams are sharing, because he's been to a school. They've been into school, Imam school, whatever that is, that they graduate from, and they're learning particular, they're studying particular subjects, and so they should have things in common with other Imams with regards to their beliefs, religious beliefs and Islamic beliefs and so on. So he should be having that. But then at the same time, he does speak against some of them, which it makes him a bit of a, I don't know, interesting, not interesting, but in a sort of like a character that you don't know which way he's in, really. So I do understand that a lot of his comments are about Muslims that immigrate or seek asylum in other countries. They should also blend in with others and that. But sometimes I feel like he's like specifically picking on Muslims. So if he's fighting extremism, then he should be fighting extremism in any form, regardless of religion they have, or regardless of what political views they have. If it is extremism, it is, and he should be fighting those. But I think he's only specifically goes after the Muslims with that kind of extremism.
Yeah,
That's
and
the feeling I have.
like some of the things he says that really give me pause for concern. I mean, he put out some tweets where he said, if you catch someone who's an extremist, save your money on the trial and just put a bullet in his head, or something along those lines. And it's like, I'm all for secularism, and I'd rather people live together peacefully, but someone calling for reforms and yet putting out that kind of statement scares me quite a bit, because I mean, if you want to have a free and open society, you do need some sort of due process. You can't just take someone out back and shoot them because you don't like what they say, right? No matter how egregious or disgusting whatever they say is. But like his statements on things like that's what gives me huge pause and huge, like a lot of concern about where to place this guy.
So what do you think of him? Do you think he's
I don't know what to think of him.
Is a hypocrite, or
I don't know if okay. There's a quote from Milton, and I've used this a couple of times recently because I see this really bad trend, and it's from Paradise Lost. And the quote is, it's Satan. It's about Satan, and it says, "Abashed the devil stood, and felt how awful goodness is, saw virtue in her shape, how lovely, and pined his loss. Basically, it's talking about the loss that Satan felt. And it wasn't just the loss to heaven's armies and his armies being defeated. He saw how awful goodness could be. He was supposed to be the one who's the bad guy. He's supposed to be the awful guy. That's his, wheelhouse. But then here goodness comes in, and he's even more awful than he is, so he's more upset at losing that than the fact that he lost heaven's armies, right? So when I see someone like Tawhidi saying things like, "Oh, if someone's an extremist, don't have a trial, just go shoot them in the back." Everything else he's saying, okay, we want to be secular, you should reform, you should not have to wear the hijab. That sounds great, that sounds good, that sounds nice. But then when he says something like that, it's like, okay, goodness is now becoming awful. And I have a fear of a lot of those kind of things, like, and I can respect where some of the people in Iran come from when they say death to the mullahs and things like that. Like, I understand intellectually why they're frustrated. But those kinds of calls for death scare me. That's when I talked about an overcorrection. Are they going to go too far in the other way? Are they going to have like purges or whatever? And so that's where Tawhidi gives me pause. Some of the stuff he says sounds great, but then he puts those really awful ideas out there as well, and that's where I am with him.
Yeah. So what do you suggest, or what do you think is the right thing to do once this regime collapses and there's all these Ayatollahs or these mullahs that graduated from the school and they're obviously not going to do any work. They're just going to be making money off going to mosques and saying a couple of words and then making millions. Whereas the workers who haven't been paid for months and months, so this pressure is there, this hatred is accumulating on people. Seeing the mullah is just sucking the blood out of them. So obviously, to human nature, once this regime topples down, there would be a lot of physical hatred towards these mullahs, and I don't think you can really, at that point, expect the people to calm down and then go like, okay, let's be fair and let's wait for the trial.
Okay.
So I think naturally this will happen. Not that I'm justifying it. I'm saying I think this will happen.
Yeah, no. Look, don't get me wrong. I understand that. Like I said, I understand where they're coming from, and like this is just obviously I'm not there. I didn't. I've never experienced anything like that, so I don't want to cast judgment upon someone like that. But like, what I would hope would happen is, okay, so the regime is overthrown and a secular regime comes in or something. All the money they've stolen, obviously, the people should get back. The country should get back, and then use that to better the people. And I understand that people are going to get killed, and I'm not seeing this through rose-colored glasses, thinking it's going to be completely benign and without any bloodshed. But I would hate to see like a perpetual violent regime come into place that puts an iron foot down. And it's just, like I said, in the aftermath of all this, there is going to be, people taking justice into their own hands. I don't like it. I don't think it's great. I understand why people would do it, but it just, I would hope that once the dust finally settles and hopefully, they can get rid of the religious regime, but they can do it once everything kind of calms down, that they can, then say, okay, let's put these people on trial. Let's, but not just vigilante violence in the streets and stuff like that. Like, again, like I said, I don't want to cast judgment on people out of a situation that, I can only know through about reading and, seeing on media. Like, I have never lived underneath that, so I can't comment on actually what it feels like to be under there. So maybe I'm doing a disservice saying something like that, but I don't know.
It's funny because the mullah recently said that once people take over us and the regime changes and people take over, this is the mullah who said that we fear that people would throw us all in the sea. the sharks to eat us. So I mean, they even have that fear, knowing they've done so much damage that once they're not in power, people will actually throw them in the sea. And people come out and said, no, we don't want to harm the ocean and the fish by throwing you nasty people into the sea and pollute the sea.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, okay. Like I said, thank you very much for your time. I don't want to keep you too much longer. If you have anything else you want to talk about, like I will put links to.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'm really enjoying it.
Like
sure.
I said, I will put links to your to where that people can get your book on Amazon. I'll put links to where people can follow you on Twitter. If there's anything else you'd like to talk about, please feel free. Otherwise, like I said, thank you very much for your time, and it's been great talking to you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Actually, I really enjoyed it. I think we covered everything. The only thing is just I'm just going to again speak on behalf of Iranian people who are on the street, having their lives in their hand, going out and shouting these wonderful slogans, spot on slogans, and demanding what is their right, and fighting what is their right, for fighting for what is their right, and being really aware of the harsh consequences they will receive, yet carry on doing it. And I think they are the bravest for doing that. And to them, they have got to the point to realize that no one is going to help them or giving them what's their right, and they have to fight for it. And so that's why they've got to this understanding, and that's what they're doing. And I just hope that it happens as soon as possible, and that they can have they can taste a bit of a free life. And not everyone, a lot of Iranians actually live abroad, but there are so many of them that are inside that wish they could, but then so many of them that wish that this regime would change so they can stay in their home country, but then have that freedom in their home country and stay in and serve their country and stay with their families. So leaving Iran, like many of us have done, both at the beginning of this revolution and throughout the 40 years, a lot of us weren't happy leaving everything behind, but it was to the point that your life is at risk and your freedom is at risk, and so you had no choice. So I really hope that day comes, that they can all go back if they want, and live with their families, live in their home country, and save it. I guess that's the thing that a lot of Iranians wish, and I hope it happens soon.
Well, that's a bit of a positive note to end on, and I actually echo your sentiment. I really do hope that the people of Iran can find a path to a freer and more open society where they can, live their lives according to their conscience. Again, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for listening. Please like and subscribe and hit the little bell to get notifications.